So our timely, hopefully, talk today is on this topic, and this is where I was getting at before, is I meant to put up a poll to ask about your New Year's resolutions. It feels like old hat that we approach January and all of a sudden start reflecting on what types of changes we're going to make for ourselves. And so it's a goal-oriented time of the year where we start trying to challenge ourselves or think about ways to have some self-improvement. And in the question box, if you want to practice using that, we'd love to hear if you have any resolutions for yourself right now. But with setting resolutions, it comports with the idea of what we're typically doing as providers, which is working with folks to understand what their recovery goals are. What are their destinations for themselves, both long-term, but also understanding what short-term steps will be helpful to get them there. And so in the context of training on person-centered planning, which is a really big topic in and of itself, one part of person-centered planning I find that providers sometimes get really tripped up on is the intent of objectives or short-term goals. Like, how do you really craft a good one that actually makes sense and is going to be helpful for the grander scheme of planning? I think objectives are actually a big linchpin in the planning process, and they're probably one to really practice how to get these right. And so we'll be talking about objectives here, but just a reminder, this is kind of a crash course primer on the topic of objectives, and we have much bigger trainings on this topic and have resources out there we're going to direct your way to national experts who do plenty of training on this as well that we've learned from. In the handouts, you'll see the PowerPoint handout there, as well as two that were shared with me from Janice Tandora, who is with Yale University and also is one of those international trainers on this topic. So I am going to dive in to my kicking off the new year with a crash course on developing meaningful objectives within person-centered planning. Just for a quick nod, I'm just going to check to see. Oh, I like that, Stephanie. Stephanie wants to be kinder and less bossy. I totally can get behind that being a goal. It probably has been a goal in my life at some point. But like many behavior change, it probably happened for a little bit and never really maintained itself, because I still can be not always kind and still a little bossy. Jasmine's sharing she wants to register to become a registered clinical social worker intern. That's a very specific, measurable goal that's relevant. So you're hitting some key things there when it comes to goal planning. Oh, and Heather's expecting budgeting, funds, paying off a few smaller loans, working on saving funds. That's a great, congratulations, Heather. So some are starting to share what's happened with their vaccine offering. I'm glad you're already thinking about that, because we're going to round back to that during open mic. So as many of you know, person-centered planning, which colleagues of ours that are doing a lot of peer work kind of pointed out, this really should just be person-driven planning, because it's more than just putting the person in the center of the process. It's teaching them the skills to be the driver of the process. But the key is it's a process. This is not an event, and it's very organic and involves a way in which we're interacting with different parties, with the individual being the most important party, that person we're serving, that we're engaging in a shared decision-making process to understand what it is that's most important to them, what might be getting in the way or what obstacles are there, what is it that's playing in their favor with strengths and resources, and how do we come up with a plan of action that essentially serves to be like a treatment roadmap of sorts. So with a treatment roadmap, specificity is key. I joke that if I got into the car, I live in Raleigh, and said, I want to go to Asheville, North Carolina, if the map came back and just said go west, I'll maybe get close to Asheville, but I'm not going to land in Asheville. So specificity and directions is just as important when it comes to planning as it is with any type of roadmap. It also, in a way, serves as a mutual contract because you're coming to some shared understanding around what's most important, what's getting in the way, what's working, and what are we all going to do together to help you make progress towards the bigger goals. And because it's a process, because it's organic, it does need to be updated. And I think of the analogy again of just using Waze or Google Maps, that if I hit a detour or if also my destination needs to change, that I need to then update and have a new set of directions. And those directions don't conveniently just need updating at your 3-month update follow-up or 6-month. Like it happens when it actually needs to happen. We like to include this slide, which credit to Janice Tandora and Diane Greeter, because I believe I pulled this from one of their presentations in the past, that having a backdrop of everything that we're going to be talking about is the idea that we continue to shift how we focus and support individuals in the services we're offering. And the old way in which we did things as mental health providers, planning was almost a moot point, or it was very narrowly focused on such things as, if we were in the room together, I'd have you shout this out, but it'd be like, stay out of the hospital, take your medications, don't use substances, show up to your appointments. It's all these things that we have come to call good patient goals. So basically, be the best patient you can be because that's what's most important to you. We know that is not helpful, it's dehumanizing, it really strips people away from what it is that really they're all about and what matters most to them. So as you can see from the shift from what's written up on the left column to what is happening on the right column, we have not necessarily succeeded with fully landing in the right column, but we're trying to get there. And doing good person-centered planning honors these different attributes of the service system we're trying to be. We are communicating our belief that people do have a future, that we have high expectations for what they're able to accomplish. We are engaging them to be an active participant in this process and really be a partner throughout the process. We support risk. Risk is something that people learn from when they make decisions that come with a consequence that maybe not be desired. That's how we shape a lot of our behaviors. And we can't step into this protective role to try to mitigate all risks that come with just being independent human adults in life. We are honoring and trying to support people making their own informed choices. So when you're doing good person-centered planning, we are really trying to honor what's listed here on the right side of the column and be mindful of how we slip into the left side of the column here. The research on person-centered planning shows that when you do it and do it well, you do see improvement in physical mental health, you see greater illness self-management, they are more active involved in the care planning process. This one's a key one, decreased no-show rates. And we notice this anecdotally when teams are really good at doing good person-centered planning and understand what matters most to people and keep the focus on what matters and what they want, people will be there when you show up to those appointments. You don't have a bunch of attempts. So that's a key one that we've noticed. Increased consistency around medications, enhanced familial, social supports, greater sense of control, efficacy, and self-care. Research on implementing person-centered planning also has detected that it's not easy, like anything. So even though there may be increased attention here, that it's often really inconsistent and lacking across areas. And a lot of plans that get reviewed often seem to lack consultation and real genuine input from the individual, and really isn't as personalized as it could be, is inadequate in terms of the level of information. It's not serving as that treatment roadmap. So research shows there's a lot of work we can do still in the area of person-centered planning. We recognize that we've seen a lot of systematic barriers, system level barriers, I should say, when it comes to planning as well. One of it is, whose plan is this? So we meet a lot of different teams operating in different environments where it may be that there may be directions from within the agency. There may be certain templates being used. There may be expectations from some mental health authority, a managed care organization, that essentially is shaping the type of plan that's being created, and it creates some confusion around whose plan is this? Who's the intended primary audience for this plan? Now, we know that it should be a contract between the provider and the individual and other people who are part of this process. It could be mom, it could be some other close friend who's part of the treatment team per se. But sometimes we're writing plans with different audiences in mind, and that basically takes us away from the true intent of person-centered planning. Some things that we notice when that happens is that you don't really pay attention to honoring people's stages of change readiness when it comes to making changes. And one key example of this that comes up is around substance use, that if you have another party who is trying to make sure that you're addressing all the problems, they aren't necessarily always attending to the person's stages of change. And so you're trying to communicate that this individual is not in a place where they see this as a problem, and some other party wants you to emphasize the problem in the plan. Another thing that we notice sometimes is that we lose sight of people who enroll in ACT have agreed to receive ACT services. They did not sign up to receive everything that ACT has to offer. So you're built to be this kind of one-stop treatment shop that is built to deliver a whole bunch of stuff. That does not mean that they want all of that from you. So again, it comes back to people looking at their preferences and values, as well as their own stages of change readiness to tap in to the different services and resources you have to offer. And then another thing we hear sometimes is that with person-centered planning, a big part of this is also emphasizing what's right about people and their strengths. We all make positive changes in our life when we leverage what goes right, when we build on the things that we're good at. And so that's the same for the folks we're serving. However, we sometimes hear from teams where they say, if I speak to people's strengths too strongly, then some other entity believes they no longer need ACT. And so I almost have to play up their illness and sickness to a point that maybe doesn't feel good. Well, here now we're going into, that's kind of a nod to the research shows this is inconsistent, that this is lacking in a lot of areas. Part of it is maybe a lack of training, a lack of education, having a good access to a good template to maybe make person-centered planning easier and more intuitive. But also there's system level issues that are getting in the way of doing really good person-centered planning as well, as we just talked about. Now, I'm going to show you just a simplified way of distilling down the organization of what goes into a plan. So we have challenges or obstacles. These are the things that are kind of not making it easy to achieve whatever this recovery goal or longer term goal is. When you are specific in listing out what these challenges are, which is not all about what's going on in the person, it's behaviors, it's symptoms, but it's also what's going on in their environment. What are their stressors? What are their resource needs? And so when you detail those things out, they are essentially what we call medical necessity criteria. These are things that also justify why they need ACT. ACT is an expensive community-based service. When you detail it out, it helps say, this is why this individual needs ACT or continues to need ACT. But that information also is helpful because it's potential targets for your interventions. Also, we're trying to capture, again, all the things right about this individual. So we're trying to exhaustively try to detect all the different strengths somebody has. That could be personality strengths. It could be things about their history. It could be resource access. It could be cognitive strengths. It could be strengths in terms of different types of habits and skills they've created. So it's a really exhaustive list of all the things that this person does well, that they're proud of and wouldn't want to change. Then these challenges and strengths is what we're going to be using to flip into being an objective. And we're going to get into the objective, obviously, a little bit more, but this is an intermediate stop between what is it we're doing in service to help somebody get to this bigger recovery goal. So just for a moment, I want to actually pause because I've seen a hand come back up and I want to just check to see if there is anybody who's going to grab the mic and any relevant questions, while also asking you guys this question, which you would just say in the question box. As a service provider, what are you actually paid to do? And I'm not looking for a specific response, kind of generically. What are you paid to do, generally speaking? So I'm saying one response is keeping folks in the community. Another person said helping clients get well. Another person said provide support where and when needed. I'm seeing assist clients in the recovery journey. One person said pay to get documentation in on time. Prevent deterioration. Improving quality of life. Saying provide treatment to people with SMI from an insurance perspective, keep costs down, which means keep folks out of the hospital. Another person said help them find other resources. Another person said work side by side with individuals to help meet their goals, help clients get benefits. So you guys are giving me a range of things. Decrease costs due to hospitalization, helping people become their full potential. So several giving responses that are touching on what I was thinking. So I'm seeing our agency mission is to strengthen recovery and dependence, but MCO emphasizes avoiding hospitalization and saving costs. Right, and sometimes those two are not mutually exclusive if we can get truly on the same page of what saves costs. The costs are not just about the line item in an MCO budget, it's about broader community costs. So I believe that what we are paid to do, and you guys are hitting on this with more global statements of it, is we're trying to build up people's strengths with them, and we're trying to help tamp down and reduce the challenges and obstacles. And as we do that, we're tamping down challenges and obstacles, we're building up strengths. This results in somebody who has a greater footing in their wellness. And they actually, in the process of us bringing down challenges, building up strengths, they may not have ever achieved whatever long-term recovery goal is listed. They just don't need us anymore to get there. And that's a key thing sometimes I think providers and funders lose sight of, is we're not there to help people meet their goals. We're building people up with their strengths. We're bringing down challenges. And along the way, they're getting closer to whatever that big recovery goal is, and sometimes meeting it when they're with us. So recovery goals, and the most important way, when we really latch on to something that truly is personal to them, that this is a bigger life goal, its key function is that it motivates. It motivates them to want to make changes that's relevant. And usually it motivates and it takes time to get there. So these typically are ones that are going to be a little bit further out there. And sometimes recovery goals are not always about achieving something in the distance. It also can be not losing something that matters to you. So sometimes people's true recovery goals for a period of time is that they've met some type of status and now they want to get better at it and keep it. So I think of examples like somebody who just got custody back of their children, or they just moved into a really nice apartment and it took time to get there, and now they're working really hard to keep it. So then in terms of this kind of graph, whatever that recovery goal they're trying to hold on to, this new apartment, custody of kids, now we're thinking of what could be the challenges? What are the risks of this not working out? And how do we help tamp those down and bring them down? How do we build up your strengths to succeed? Self-determination theory is one that always plays into a lot of our trainings because I think it really cuts to what's most important when you're thinking about goal planning. And what this theory basically says is that as humans, we have these inherent needs that show up at a pretty young age, and we try to find ways to meet these needs. And it's not that we don't have cultural and personality nuances to how this shows up, but in general, we're seeking to be able to have some level of independence and autonomy, that we can take care of some things for ourselves. We also have a need to be connected. We are social beings. And some of us are good with too deep relationships. Some of us thrive off of the activity of being with others. And then the other need is that we have a need to be good at something, to like be recognized as being competent. And there's a feedback loop, like we're acknowledged for being good at something. And when I think of true recovery goals, they usually are hitting on one or more of these inherent needs when you really get down to them. I want to spend holidays with my family. I want to be a published poet. I want to live in this exact apartment in this neighborhood. I want to finish college, get a job in hospitality business. I want to help others who are homeless and not be homeless myself. I want to have my home, some pets, dogs with a fenced-in backyard. Sorry, I'm trying to click and see this at the same time. I want to run for elected office. I want to get married, maybe have kids. I want to own my own car and be able to visit my sister. Connections, independence, good at something. So this is where, and this last run coming up with interventions, this is what we're getting paid to do. We're getting paid to interact and deliver something, to build strengths up, bring down challenges. And as an ACT team, we're designed to do a lot. So this is where fidelity and how much you're packing into this model can really matter in terms of our service delivery and with our planning. Because the more you have available to offer to somebody, the more tools that you're thinking about as potential interventions that's going to be helpful for these longer term goals. So not to go through all of this, but be keeping in mind that recovery goals are motivating. They're big things. They're big ticket items. They typically drill back to something with self-determination. Then we're designed to do nearly everything but dentistry, even though I really want dentists on teams in 10 years. And so now what's in the middle are these objectives. This is going to be the linchpin to help us truly think through, what are we doing when we go see John 3 days a week? Why are we seeing John 3 days a week? What are the actual interventions? Why are we doing these things? How do they connect to the bigger goal? So there's where our objectives, and objectives can also be called short-term goals. I like objective because I think that how you think about measuring them and how they're written, they're objective versus subjective. These are these intermediate steps that's getting you closer to the longer term goal. And that's key. Closer doesn't mean you arrived. They're meaningfully getting you closer to the bigger goal at hand. And not to bring in an old acronym, but I think it's a helpful one and it's a familiar one. But I think sometimes when we get trained on SMART goals, they may not be fleshed out in the world of ACT as much as we could. So I'm going to try this as an exercise with you guys. So just if you don't remember, SMART stands for specificity, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So specificity, this is key throughout the entire planning process, is don't use abstract, vague terms. And if you are trained to use catch-all phrasing, because in part there's concern about an audit and where you don't want to be audited and found to do something that we didn't plan for, separate out that part of the plan. You want a clear set of directions about what is it you're actually doing, what's the need here, and try to keep that clear in the planning process somewhere. When I find that we don't have a lot of specificity, it may mean that you didn't do the work to really understand the individual and what is it that's needed and wanted and preferred. State it simply and straightforward. Use clear language because it needs to be understandable from all parties' perspective. Because of this, usually using an active voice versus a passive voice, or using action verbs, can be really helpful. And then also with specificity is try to define the behavior that you're looking for as clearly as possible. So as an example of this is sometimes you may see an objective that's worded in a way around getting employment. What does it mean to get employment? Does it mean that the person has to be fully employed by the time that you hit whatever date? Does it mean that they have succeeded in not losing the job? Did it mean that they kept the job for 2 weeks? Like, the more you can be specific about what is the measure of success for this objective, then the more you're going to be able to strive for it with your interventions and supports and have a moment of success if you hit it, and then learn from it if you didn't. And then again, think of them as those cobblestones that even if it's, hey, John kept a job part-time for 2 weeks, and even if he lost it by a deadline, he met the goal. He kept a job for 2 weeks, and that was relevant for John's growth, because in the past, he keeps jobs for 2 days. So being specific is key to the process. Measurable. This is where I think objectives, when we review teams and treatment plans, sometimes really gets, it really can fall apart. So often where I say here, smart objectives fall apart in their smartness, because I think people run away with the idea that measurable just means put in some kind of quantitative figure. Really, when I think of measurable, this is about the objectivity. So you will know whether success happened as easily as me looking at that person in their situation, as Maria looking at it, as Chris looking at it. So it is something where we have, in the research world, we would say inner rate of reliability, because we made it measurable and observable. And so usually it's either it happened or it didn't happen. And so just inserting quantitative metrics doesn't make it measurable in and of itself. And sometimes it undercuts the other qualities like relevant and being achievable. And I'm going to have some examples to show this. Finally, achievable, or it could be called attainable. This is not your provider judgment about whether they can achieve something. It's about goodness of fit. In the occupational therapy world, they talk a lot about just right challenges, because they're trying to make work with somebody around developing a skill so that the target of the change is challenging enough that makes it worthwhile, but not too easy. So you're trying to find something, because an objective, if you're thinking about that timetable, you're trying to achieve something in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, maybe 9 months. So the achievable piece is keeping in mind that time frame of something that is a shorter period of time, but also takes into account personal factors and environmental factors. So you may be thinking about things around income, age, preferences, skill levels, stages of change readiness, and then you crosswalk it with that shorter timeline to come up with something that is clearly achievable. And these aren't mutually exclusive because they impact each other. The next one is relevant, and this is a big one, where again, when I review plans, Maria and I, with doing TMAC reviews, part of that process is reviewing treatment plans. And this is where sometimes I do a lot of head cocking, because I'll read the objective and then I'll look at the recovery goal, and then I'm looking at the interventions, and I'm just trying to make sense of how is this all fitting together. I just don't understand, how is this an irrelevant stepping stone to this other thing that they want? And how is it that the interventions make sense given what you wrote here? So is this a meaningful stepping stone towards the bigger recovery goal? Does it comport with client preferences? Does it hit something that clearly matters to that individual versus trying to force something on them that they're not really buying into? Does it reflect an actual outcome? Because that's what an objective should be, is it's a short-term outcome versus a potential mediator or process. So sometimes we see objectives where it's basically John will meet with the employment specialist twice a week. It's like, that's John participating in treatment. That's not an outcome. His outcome is, does he get a job? Or does he succeed with getting at least 2 interviews? So that's where confusion happens and no longer makes the objective relevant to the architecture of a plan. And then finally, time bound. And really the only thing to say here is that not everything has to happen in 3 months. I think that's a default setting, is we're always thinking like, okay, as evidenced by this happening in 3 months. Sometimes it makes sense it's 4 months or 6 months. The idea is that it's probably definitely less than a year, but have it be something that actually makes sense given how much time will be needed to achieve this change. So it may be written as a time span within this amount of time, may have a target date that you're looking for. So I'm going to critique some objectives with you guys, but I'm also going to pause and just see if there's questions, comments, or things in the question box that I'm missing. Good. All right. So I ideally would have created polls for this, and I did not. So you can use the question box to weigh in. So this is called Spot the Problems. And I'll remind us of our standards here. Sherry will, and I know you don't know the backdrop for this, but the best you can, not knowing what Sherry's striving for. Sherry will decrease depression as evidenced by her smiling 5 times per day for the next 3 months per her self-report and observation. What are some problems with this objective as it's written? We're talking specificity, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time. So Jennifer is questioning relevant right away. She says, who says smiling means you're not depressed? Good. So Jeff also picked up, is this relevant? Yep, so I'm hearing some relevance. There's some other things. Of course, she needs a smile that doesn't decrease depression. The other thing here is, how's this task gonna be done? Who the heck, I know, Jen. So who's measuring this too? Poor Sherry. Sherry is being asked to track an event that may happen more than 5 times per day and to do it across 3 months. That's kind of really absurd in a way and not practical, not helpful. And then the other thing I'll point out is we're not really even defining what depression is for Sherry either, which may or may not be necessary, but here we're also being a little vague and maybe some specificity. It may be that we know Sherry well and Sherry knows herself well, that when she's deeply depressed, she struggles to smile. And it really may be a relevant indicator that depression is lifting. But trying to track how often somebody's smiling, you threw a number in, it feels measurable, but it's not relevant. It's going to be a really challenging thing to measure. So Betty, you're doing it. She's asked me, how do I respond to the question? I'm seeing your guys' responses come in. Good. How about this one? So what if we know, by way of conversations with Sherry, that when Sherry is feeling better, she actually starts going back to the salon that she goes to? Like, that is a clear behavioral indicator that the depression has improved significantly for her. So Sherry will visit the hair salon to get her hair done within the next 2 months, indicating significant improvement in her depression. So this may be more relevant to Sherry. It is easier to measure. We're not trying to go with a tracker 5 times a day smiling, which I always joke that we're probably inducing paranoia. It is with the assumption that going to the hair salon is a clear indicator that she's feeling better, and it's an easier one we can detect. Well, no, we visited her. We see that Sherry's glammed up. It's not something that's going to pass by us. Can you use something like a Beck's depression inventory? You absolutely can. However, for some people, that doesn't feel as good to have to report out on that weekly or monthly. So it's trying to tailor it to them. Oops, didn't have all my things here. So I'm going to give you, I have 2 more of these. Tyrone will succeed with getting employment as evidenced by receiving and participating in ACT services and attending all appointments. What's the problem with this? And I will say, and I know people who review plans like Betty and other folks on here, we're not making these up. We do see these types of objectives, and your teams may be ones that sometimes fall into doing objectives like these. So what do we got here for Tyrone? He's going to succeed with getting employment as evidenced by receiving and participating in ACT services and attending all appointments. No time frame, good. And we're vague. What does it mean getting employment necessarily? The as evidenced by steps have nothing to do with actually getting employment. Good. Exactly. Michael points out, what if they don't get employment but attended all the appointments? So this is getting back to those idea that just because you participate in receiving a service doesn't mean it means you get to the success. You want an outcome here. So the outcome is, and I think you guys are starting to allude to it, it's getting employment, probably for Tyrone, depending on that time frame again. Achievableness. We operate in the world of best practice IPS. Somebody wants to get a job, I don't believe it needs to take forever to get a job. So I think this is something, getting the job is something that absolutely could be in the short-term objective role. Now, what is our measure of getting a job? Because him participating in services, your services may not be that good and not that helpful, and we never actually get there. But here's another way we could reframe this that's more intuitive and concrete. Tyrone will have worked in a part-time job for at least 1 week by this date. So as I was saying earlier, sometimes we lose sight of the specificity of trying to capture what success is. So for Tyrone, as an example, and we may even want to say, what is part-time work? It may be 5 hours a week for him. So for him, it may be that Tyrone is great at interviews. He is actually really good at getting the job. He just doesn't have good follow-through. He has a lot of trouble with actually committing and keeping the job. And so if he gets a job and it has success for a week on the job, that would be success for Tyrone. And even if he's no longer in that job as of March 15th, that is success we can build on in those stepping stones. And may have even a new objective related to employment for the next round. Good. So I'm seeing you guys are hitting the marks in terms of questioning the other one that I just showed you. So, and somebody pointed out that we may want to specify something about what the job is too. So Carol, this is my last one. Carol will no longer experience hallucinations as of March 15th, 2021. What's our problems here? There's a lot of them. So we have problems with specificity, good. Achievable. We don't know whether this is something that really is realistic for Carol. We don't know Carol's background. Yep. Somebody else said, wow, that's totally unrealistic. Attainable, specific, relevant. Amy's hitting a bunch of them. Jeff is saying cured, not likely. Yeah, exactly. We don't even know what the hallucinations are at this point. So we're definitely missing some specificity. And here's probably something that, again, we could probably always find exceptions to this statement, but more times than not, people care more about something relevant to functioning and how they're just engaging as adults and taking on different responsibilities and experiences in life more than the symptoms themselves. The symptoms live at a level, oftentimes at an intervention level. What is it that Carol misses in her life by way of these hallucinations, and what hallucinations are we even talking about? So here's a reframe with some backdrop. Carol will be getting at least 7 hours of sleep per night as of March 15th, 2021. The subtext here, and this is where you'd be writing things in, potentially in an authorization description. You include things in a plan that Carol agrees with. And if you're including anything that's capturing things about stages of change readiness that's pre-contemplative, you have to be careful. They shouldn't live in a plan because they're not signing off on it. So you may truly believe that there is some active psychotic symptoms going on. They don't see it, it doesn't go in a plan. You have to keep that kind of summary in something separate for the sake of clinical processing and planning. Here, Carol experiences auditory hallucinations, voices of two people who get very loud and demeaning in the late evening. She finds the voices distressing as they raise her anxiety and disrupt her sleep at night. Subsuming interventions, so underneath again, the objective in the plan, you'd have interventions that's related to sleep hygiene practices, adjusting medications. These are just examples, not necessarily what Carol wants. So what may live under this objective is things like deep breathing exercises, wearing headphones with music at night, some kind of PM physical exercise to kind of physically wear her out so she falls asleep easier. So that's where we're addressing potentially the symptoms. And as you guys said, for a lot of folks, they're not necessarily eliminating those hallucinations, they're quieting them. And that may be what we're trying to help Carol achieve, is quieting how disruptive they are during a time of the day that becomes very problematic. Okay. So we had these here. So that is, so just again, it's reminding that this is this is the money spot of the plan, is figuring out how to get objectives crafted in a way that makes sense. They're truly stepping stones to a true recovery goal. They are addressing something that's relevant to building strengths, addressing challenges, and the interventions that fall underneath make sense given what you're trying to achieve here, like we just spoke about with Carol. We have the example of employment, and employment is one that we often bring up because for some people, employment in a career may truly be like the big recovery goal. But oftentimes it's a means to something bigger. It's an opportunity to get extra income. It's an opportunity to get paid to do something that you're pretty good at. It's an opportunity to meet people. It's an opportunity to have some structure throughout your week. So employment often can live at the level of an objective in a way that makes sense to get us closer to something bigger. But for some people, it is the big thing. Here's a few references, and I welcome any other that you have that you found to be helpful. So we always recommend this book. It's a go-to book for learning treatment planning, person-centered care. At Yale, where our friend Janice is, that they have a website with tools. She actually just updated me that she's going to be actually doing a deep dive to update this spring. She shared a couple of handouts that are in the handout section for you. But again, this is a topic that is extracted from a very big topic in terms of doing really good person-centered planning. So as I close it out, any thoughts, questions on that? When I do training on this, I always do a teaser. I say that I'm going to show you the best recovery plan template I've ever seen. And people are all like eagerly just waiting to see it. And then I show them a blank piece of paper. Because I truly believe that if you understand the basics of what you're trying to achieve and writing up a plan with somebody, then you can write that on a blank piece of paper. And sometimes those templates, when they don't really work well, they trip us up and we get confused about what goes where and what's the purpose of all this.
Great participation on the Q&A too. It was nice to see so much in the question box. I was wondering kind of how you were going to pull that off, Lorna, given how much we both rely on audience participation when we do.
I know.
And this one in particular is hard to do when you don't have people in the room. So
it's my skill I developed over 9 months, I have to say. 9 months of COVID and virtual training is just like I'm scanning everything on the screen all the time.
Oh, you got a question in here. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm. So one question is, how would you rework an objective pertaining to personal hygiene, such as client will attend to hygiene daily over the next 3 months, since this seems to focus more on symptoms instead of focusing on the functioning? Good question, and it really can be one that gets tricky because I think hygiene, it's personal for all of us in terms of how we define what makes us feel good in terms of our own kind of personal grooming and upkeep. And so for me, when it comes to hygiene, I see it as, and I welcome other people's opinions on this too, and can read it once again. Self-grooming, typically when it's really departing from a standard that most people would say is going to be in some ways good for somebody, that's beyond personal, that usually it's creating problems in their life somewhere. Like that's where it's creating problems. And that's why we're reacting to it, is that maybe it's resulting in social alienation. Maybe it's creating problems with skin hygiene, and there's concern for actual health concerns because of the neglect that's going on. We know that poor dental care, when it goes really amok, it really can be a cardio concern for folks. So I think it's trying to understand, how is it that, and get specific again, is it just full not taking care of oneself in all ways? Is it that the showering or some kind of bathing is happening, but it's incomplete, so they're not able to do it fully? Is it that the frequency is happening, but it's like once a month? So you're trying to detail what it is, what's the consequential impact to other things in their life? Because that's the hook, that to try to help that individual see if this is even worthwhile to address. You're trying to see the tie into something else that matters to them. And then you're trying to also understand what's behind it. Sometimes the what's behind it is something as simple as they don't have hot water and we never realized it. It could be that they don't have access to a private facility and they have a trauma history. So some of this is being investigated to even understand like what's behind this behavior, but how does it actually tie to something that has a consequence that they would care about. So it's not being this global abstract around hygiene, it's locking in more specific to something that matters to them.
I think that's true for so many of these, right? Like the common questions around like, well, how do we address taking medications, or medication adherence, or substance use, or any of those? It's like, well, what is it that they want in their lives? And then how are these not taking the medications or substance use getting in the way of what they want in their lives? So like you said, always coming back to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's the tie-in really is, it's almost like for some folks can have a type of psychosis where it's almost a complete lack of awareness. Like they aren't attending to these things. Their mindset is elsewhere. So then it's about some kind of intentional activation and probing to even see if that they're, wanting to try it out. So I usually think about it as like, hey, if you aren't used to doing your laundry, would you want to try out seeing what it's like for you to do your laundry once a week and how that feels to have clean clothes? And if you don't like it, then we abandon it. So sometimes it's about activating and giving people a chance to try something out to see if they like it, and then coming up with a plan to support them.